mention to board members that we're going to go into closed session as soon as we finish the standing committee meeting, so for everybody to be kind of ready for that.
Good morning. Welcome to the Ventura County Air Pollution Control Board meeting of June 10th. And I'm calling the meeting to order, and I'll ask for the roll call.
Board Member Ramirez?
Here.
Board Member Bennett?
Here.
Board Member Foy? Board Member Long?
I'm here.
Board Member Morgan?
Here.
Board Member Pollock?
Here.
Board Member Sharkey?
Present.
Board Member Tucker?
Present.
Board Member Zaragoza?
Here.
And Board Member Parks.
Here. Thank you. We have next is our Pledge of Allegiance. Robert Kwong, would you like to lead us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the agenda review. Does anybody want to make any changes to the agenda? Here's your opportunity. See none, we'll just keep the agenda as is and go to public comment. Do we have any members of the public who want to comment?
I'm sorry, we passed the minutes.
Oh, okay.
Move to approve.
Yep.
We got a motion from
Second.
Mr. Sharkey, second from Supervisor Long. Any objections to the minutes or abstentions? Seeing none, those are approved. Thank you for catching that. Again, no members from the public wishing to speak during our public comment period. Not seeing any. Here's an opportunity for board comment. Any comments from the board? Not seeing any. Then let's go right to our regular agenda. And our first item is item 8, a public hearing regarding the Air Pollution Control District's proposed fiscal year 2014-2015 budget. Mr. Villegas.
Should be up any second. Chair Parks, members of the board, I'm Mike Villegas, Air Pollution Control Officer, and I'm just waiting for that presentation to pop up. As you're aware, the district's budget has two components, the operating budget and the pass-through grant budget. Today I'm going to be focusing on the operating budget because that's the budget that affects the district's bottom line. In the pass-through grant budget, for every expenditure we have corresponding revenue. So there's no impact on the district's fund balance. This is an overview of the entire district budget. You can see it's a $9.1 million budget with $8 million in the operating budget and $1.1 million in the pass-through grant budget. And in the next slide, I'm going to discuss the net cost. The projected net cost for the upcoming fiscal year 2014-15 is $269,000, excluding contingency of $300,000. I'd like to point out that the district has never, in the history of the district, utilized the contingency fund. Also, I'd like to point out that we're very conservative in our budget, especially when we look at the revenue side. And one example of this is our fines item, where we budget $108,000, but we've collected anywhere from $165,000 up to nearly $400,000 in a year. And I'd also like to point out that I think we're going to be well above the $108,000 in the upcoming fiscal year. It looks like we have one very significant notice of violation we'll be settling early in the fiscal year with a Title V facility, and that could lead to a six-figure settlement. So as you can see, that fund balance is going to become much less than $269,000. I think it'll be well below $200,000.
That six-figure settlement, is it tied to specific requirements on how we use it?
No, it isn't. It just goes to the district's operating fund.
Thank you.
Quick overview. Expenditures are up by nearly $223,000 from the current fiscal year. Revenues up by $95,000, and we have one increment request, and I'll discuss these in detail. Once again, we have $25,000 available and possibly more than this amount for motor vehicle emission reduction projects, most likely electric vehicle infrastructure or some type of transit incentive program. I'd like to point out that we're utilizing the DMV funds that are allocated to the district under AB 2766 to the maximum extent feasible within the district. So any monies we don't use this, in other words, we need to pass these funds through to projects. On the expenditure side, you can see the increase of nearly $223,000. Looking at salaries and employee benefits, they're down by approximately $38,000, and this is because the district's contribution to retirement actually went down in this fiscal year, caused by the fact that the employees are depositing more towards the retirement account themselves due to the new labor agreements. When you look at services and supplies, we're up nearly $225,000. And the big driver there is the fact that, as you're aware, there's a proposal to place a new power plant in Ventura County. The permitting for that power plant is extremely time intensive, approximately at least a man-year. And we do not have experience in doing Energy Commission power plant permitting or prevention of significant deterioration permits where there's an extensive air modeling. So we were going to contract with the San Joaquin Unified Air Pollution Control District. And they would actually do the permitting for us. We would handle the public outreach and public input meetings here in Ventura County. I'd also like you to note that even though that's a lot of money going out for the permitting, we will be reimbursed via our Rule 42 for the permit processing fees for the cost of this activities. Lastly, our fixed assets are up by $35,000. This is because we're replacing obsolete monitoring and computer equipment, such as servers and computer switches. This next graphic shows our expenditures, and you can see salaries and employee benefits account for 78% of the district's expenditures. We expect this to stay at least at this level, especially with the fact that for the next few years we're expecting an increase in the employer contribution to retirement. On the revenue increase, we see a $95,000 increase. This is largely driven by the $225,000 we plan to take under our Rule 42 for the power plant permit project. It's being offset by a decrease in our emission fees due to the slowdown, and we're just seeing less manufacturing in this county. Our reductions to our federal grant and expected low interest earnings on the district's fund balance.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, could I ask a question about the power plant issue? What is the anticipated expense for contracting with San Joaquin?
It's going to be
Less than the revenue?
less than $225. Actually, their hourly rates are lower than ours, and the power plant proponent's going to be paying based on our hourly rate. But of course, it's going to also have to defray the cost of us running public outreach meetings, public workshops, and taking that input, responding to comments.
So no net increase?
There'd
because of
really be, it's going to be a wash.
Okay, thank you.
This graphic shows the district's revenue sources. As you can see, the big three are the DMV fees at $2.8 million, permit fees at $2.9 million, and our federal grant at $1.1. Probably the toughest thing for me is seeing the federal grant slowly decrease over time, especially with the fact that the feds keep adding mandates to us, and I'll discuss that further. Looking at the big picture, we have the 49 FTE. If you remember when I took over the district in 2002, we had 64 full-time equivalents working at the district. And I'd like to point out, even with the 49 FTE, we are meeting all of our mandates and fulfilling our programs quite well. When you look at the stationary source side, the non-motor vehicle side, the fees that we're collecting from permit fees and the federal grant are not quite covering the cost of the stationary source programs. On the motor vehicle side, the DMV fees are covering all the costs and allowing us to pass through some funds for electric vehicle infrastructure, etc. This fiscal year, we did not have a fee increase because we projected a net savings, which we did achieve, of a couple $100,000. The disheartening part for me is the federal grant continues to decrease even as they apply new mandates to the district for reporting on our notices of violation into a rather cumbersome computer program, and the fact that the administration is currently looking at tightening the smog standard yet again, which would require yet another air quality management plan, and that's a significant workload placed on the district. We're working closely with Public Works Real Estate Division to locate a building to serve as our office, and we're currently working with a developer in the Springville area of Camarillo, and we should be receiving pricing information either later this week or early next week. Our state subvention is level at $200,000, and we continue to utilize all of the available administrative funds for our incentive programs and our pass-through grant program. And actually, if you look closely at the pass-through grant budget, you'll see that there is one FTE that is completely paid for by the administrative funds, and that's the individual, Mr. Chris Frank, who handles our Carl Moyer and Egg Assistance programs. Lastly, the fund balance is more than sufficient to cover the net costs, which I anticipate as being less than $200,000, and we have a fund balance that's quite healthy. Here's a look at our fund balance, and I want to point out three numbers. The first is the $569,000, which is allocated to cover the net cost. But as I said, that includes the $300,000 for contingency, which we've never touched before, and the fact that we have the $269 remaining, which I believe we can drive below $200,000. Next, we have $5 million set aside for building acquisition, and we have an unassigned fund balance of $4.9 million, which is the fund balance that is above the target of 6 months. 6 month target would be $4 million. So you can see the district's in good financial shape, even setting aside $5 million for a building. And my last slide is a fund balance projection. And I want to point out this fund balance projection takes into account that our federal grant's going to go down, but includes no fee increases. And as you can see, even with the purchase of a building, looking out to fiscal year 18-19, we're going to stay above that 6 month target. But what I would propose is some very modest fee increases to help level out that line, so we don't start in early 2020, 2021, start dropping below that target.
And I would like to ask us to question the 6 month fund balance and adequacy once we own a building. You own a building, something goes wrong, suddenly bang, you've got a big expense. So I'd like us to do an analysis of that before we adopt our budget for next year, about whether 6 months is appropriate and whatever professionals you need in terms of the ownership of a building.
We'll contact the other small districts, maybe the Special District Association, and certainly the Auditor Controller's Office. That concludes my presentation at this time. I'll be happy to take questions.
Do we have any questions? It's a good presentation.
I had one question. With regards to the building purchase, are you anticipating next year possibly having a capital expenditure line item in order for improvements in that building, or as Supervisor Bennett pointed out, that if there's an issue, you have some extra funds set aside for potential capital improvement of that
We may have to set money aside for repairs, in essence. What we're looking right now is a build-to-suit. So we probably wouldn't be looking at per se capital improvements, but potentially should something go wrong with the building. But yes, we would probably have to set money aside in a contingency fund for that purpose.
So Mike, it's going to be a brand new building, that's what you're saying then?
Potentially, yes. We'll find out. Like I said, we'll get the pricing information either later this week or early next week.
And Mike, they should build it to your standards and everything you need, specifications, so
Absolutely.
a lot of the TIs, or whatever you call them, would not have to worry about those, because those are part of the building.
Yes, there would be.
I just share my overall concern. I like to see that our agency stays within a area where all the other government agencies are instead of a standalone by itself, but that's just me. Are there any other questions on the budget? Do we have a motion? And this would be to, specifically the motion would be to, as one of the first of two public hearings regarding the adoption, and hold the first of two, which we have done, not having any public comment cards on that, and then to go ahead and schedule for our next meeting the final hearing?
Yes, that would be June 24th.
How about a so moved? Got a
Second.
motion from Mayor Sharkey, second from Councilmember Morgan. Any objections to the motion? Not seeing any, then that is approved unanimously, and we'll go on to our next item, which is item number 9, public hearing regarding the adoption of a resolution approving and adopting the 2014 Reasonably Available Control Technology State Implementation Plan revision.
That's correct. Good morning. My name is Chuck Thomas. I'm the planning manager with the district, and that's a very big mouthful to say over and over again. So we simply call it the RACSIP for short. The RACSIP is a requirement of the Federal Clean Air Act for moderate and above ozone non-attainment areas. We're a serious ozone non-attainment area, so it does apply to us. We did RACSIPs in 2006 and 2009 as well. Both have been approved by the EPA. In fact, the 2009 RACSIP just got approved a few weeks ago. The RACSIP is due to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency by July 20th. And when approved by EPA, it will be an official revision to the California State Ozone State Implementation Plan. RACT, R-A-C-T, is defined as the lowest emissions limitation that a particular emission source is capable of meeting by the application of control technology that is reasonably available considering technological and economic feasibility. I always have to read that because I cannot remember it. U.S. EPA establishes RACT for specific emission source categories through documents called Control Technique Guidelines. 3 examples of CTG source categories are organic liquid storage, oil tanks, gasoline stations, and industrial boilers, and there's a whole boatload of others. So the RACSIP is a required demonstration that our ozone precursor rules, namely VOC and NOx, meet minimum standards specified by the CTGs for each source category. It also applies to what we call major sources of VOC and NOx for which there are no CTGs. Those are called major source non-CTG sources. Ma'am? Oh, I thought you had a question. Normally, we would compare VOC and NOx rules against the corresponding CTGs as we did in 2006 and 2009. However, this time, EPA's proposed ozone implementation rule specifies that it's no longer good enough because most of the CTGs, EPA CTGs, haven't been updated in years, are now obsolete. That's because technology moves on. So, for this time, we had to compare our rules with those of other air districts with higher ozone non-attainment classifications, namely the South Coast and San Joaquin Valley districts. The results of our analysis of our rules were that all of our VOC and NOx rules meet or significantly exceed RACT, which means that none of our rules need to be revised or updated. Attachment A to the board letter is the resolution adopting the 2009 RACSIP revision. Attachment B is the RACSIP itself that lays out the background requirements, methodologies, and the RACT evaluations themselves for each of the rules. Tyler Harris of our staff did most of the heavy lifting on the RACT evaluations. There are findings. There are two basic sets of findings. The one applies to CTG sources and the major non-CTG sources. And the second set of findings are called negative declarations, not to be confused with CEQA negative declarations. Negative declarations are for those sources for which, or those CTG sources for which we do not have sources in the county. Table B2 of the RAC-CIP, starting on page 13, constitutes the RAC-CIP negative declarations. We did a public review starting April 3rd through May 5th. We received no public comments. We did receive some informal comments from EPA staff in San Francisco. They were concerned about one of our rules, Rule 7424.1, concerning pleasure craft coatings. The district, the EPA staff noted that the ROC content limits for several coating types did not match those for pleasure craft coatings in the CTG for miscellaneous metal and plastic part coatings. We responded to EPA's comments by expanding the RAC analysis of Rule 7424.1 to demonstrate that the emission reductions achieved by the rule exceeded those that would occur if the district had adopted the baseline CTG requirements. Rule 74.24.1, as written, results in a 65% greater emission reductions than what would be achieved using just the baseline CTG recommendations. For this reason, along with other technological issues discussed in the analysis, district staff concluded that the current rule meets RAC and does not need to be revised. EPA staff concurred. So in conclusion, district staff recommends that your board approve and adopt the 2014 RAC-CIP revision and related actions in the board letter. That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Before your questions, we do have one public comment card. Mr. Kevin Tohill, did you want to come speak on this item?
Good afternoon, board members, APC staff, and neighbors. My name is Kevin Toho, and I live in Simi Valley on Lightning Ridge Way, adjacent to the C.L. Barnett oil farm, permit number 1146. I'm here today to discuss the 2014 All ACT and SAT plan. You should not approve this plan. It does not address some concerns. The oil facility next to my property originally had a vapor recovery system which was installed by C.L. Barnett in the late 80s. I've turned in the paperwork for that for you to see. Mr. Barnett kept the system up and running, burning off the gas until he passed, 14 years later after the exemption. Unfortunately, we've been told that the lanterns were turned off since 2004. The collection and smelling of the gas, the collecting and selling of the gas, they were not collecting and selling the gas. Instead, they were releasing the gas into the air through the pressure release valve, or when that latch was opened. I have attached a copy of the exemption, and the 15 lanterns were required to burn off the gasing gas, and was approved by Mr. Olson, Lyle Olson, from APCD Code Enforcement. The request for exemption was only for the storage tank, and not for the gas casing. In November 2013, the oil wells were shut down. Even with them shut down, the benzene levels came back 2.5 times Cal OSHA's permissible limits. The smell of gas was so strong in my backyard last summer, we were not able to play outside, and even with our windows open, developed headaches and other breathing-related issues. It has been nice the past couple months to be able to use our backyard again, and I thank you for that. To leave our windows open and not get the headaches. I have reviewed the 2014 draft to try to understand, is it truly addressing the vapor recovery system for these smaller tanks, farms, and unfortunately it does not. The RICT draft states, as you know, it's very complicated to say, so I'm going to skip it. Please review this requirement. It's basically that they're supposed to use the latest economics, feasibility study, and technology to help with the vapor recovery. Please have APCD review the current draft and not give the 50 or so facilities in your district an exemption. The one next to my house uses this exemption that was for the storage tank and releases all the gas through it. They are not required to test the air, nor are they required to monitor how much gas is being released into our community, just to show how much oil they pump. The exemption calculations do not take into consideration gas gassing into consideration, because gas gassing is an unknown. As we know, well as above, an unknown factor. Gas releases into our neighborhood. I met with Sally Barnett, and she wants to do the right thing, but she's told by Chris Burkhoff and that a vapor recovery system is not necessary, and APCD does not regulate it or require it. The draft does not state the renewal process of the exemptions either. Please have APCD revise the RACT draft to address these issues. I've been told by C.R. Barnett's exemption because of an application they filed in '89, which renews each year. They have not refiled new calculations or paperwork based on this newer technology or newer feasibility studies since '89. It should not take more families getting sick for this to become a public nuisance and it to be taken to the next level. From C.R. Barnett filed an application because of financial burden, but the financial burden has been placed on my family. My wife and I have unfortunately lost both work from illness and from going to doctor's appointments and examinations. We have medical expenses as well because of this exposure. Now we have to pay for legal representation because we have now been receiving letters from C.R. Barnett's law firm. Unfortunately, the last letter, first I should go back. The first letter, legal team understands the financial impact on the lawsuit. So I stopped speaking about C.R. Barnett publicly.
You have 20 seconds left.
Okay. I thought you got more when
You
it's not
started
public.
with 5.
Okay.
Okay.
C.R. Barnett would have on my family the financial impact. Now, after the second letter I receive stating that they are filing suit against our family and using APCD's requirements, saying that they're within government regulations. I've handed in paperwork along with this letter that I'm not going to have time to finish, along with the 2 letters from the law firms who represent C.R. Barnett. Please do not approve this proposal
Thank you.
today.
And I will ask staff if they
Thank you.
can address this now, or maybe it's something we need to bring back to hear further, whether this is the appropriate mechanism to be looking at to address your issue. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Board.
Could we get a response from staff?
Yeah, just to let you know with the rack SIP, what it is a comparison of our rules to rules such as the South Coast. And when you look at, and the San Joaquin, kind of the 2 extreme areas in California, and when you look at these oil field rules, there are exemptions for small tanks in all the jurisdictions. So I don't see that the rack SIP's the appropriate way to look at it. I mean, I'm more than happy to sit down with Mr. Tohill again and look at the actual numbers, the cost effectiveness numbers that are cited in the earlier exemption to see if that changes anything. And that's what I would propose to do going forward. And to give you a little perspective, the latest I had heard from Dogger on this facility is that it's still not in operation. It's not in operation, so there really isn't anything for us to control. And I have this feeling that this facility is not going to get back in operation. Basically, I think the legal documents that show that they have a right, the oil field operator, to operate there, my thought is it's starting to look like they've been lost to history. And if they can't prove that, they're not going to be able to operate. If they're not going to be able to operate, they're not going to install controls. So I think the chicken and egg issue is here right now.
So the two questions I have, one is, there's still gas being emitted even though it's not in operation?
The tank's been emptied, but there's still what we call a tank bottom, meaning those are some heavy sledges. But over time, those emissions are going to drop off because they're going to emit the last bits of VOC that they actually have.
And also, do they have to go through a new permit process in order to begin again if they wish to?
No, they would not.
And then the exemption that we allow here, you say is allowed in the San Joaquin Valley. It's a standard type of exemption for the small
For
tanks.
small tanks, yes.
And I'm just wondering, do we have the ability, since we're not like the San Joaquin Valley, we have, homes right up next to some of these in at least one instance, are we able to change that exemption?
We could, if we could show that it's cost effective to do so.
And would we be doing that within this law here that's coming before us, or rather this plan?
I think this plan, the RAC SIP is very specific in that it's comparing our rules to, in essence, the CTGs that Chuck outlined, the South Coast District and the San Joaquin District, in essence. And I think the RAC SIP can move forward. Like I said, I'm more than willing to work with Mr. Tohill to determine if there should be changes to our regulation. But once again, they would need to be operating to make all that come to fruition.
Right, and they're not operating right now, but they potentially could.
They
So
could.
if we did want to visit this issue of the exemption, how
But we
would...
can do that separately.
Okay, it isn't related to this, and I think that's what the specific concern is, as I heard it, unless I didn't hear accurately. That's what I heard, is that we allow for this exemption. We have the potential to revisit whether we want to allow for these kind of exemptions.
Absolutely. We have the ability to review our rules at any time.
Okay. Well, I certainly would be open to getting the information about the positives and negatives of looking at removing that ability to exempt the small tanks, particularly when they're right next to residences. Councilmember Ramirez?
I have a question. It's my understanding from this discussion that material is still, or gas is still being emitted even though there's no operation. Is that what you said, Mr. Villegas?
There could be some. As I said, after you empty a tank, there's what's called the heavy sludge at the bottom, what we call a tank bottom. And that will have some emissions, but that's going to drop off over time dramatically.
Okay, and is that something we still regulate, even though it's not in operation, it's just sort of standing there, disintegrating,
Well,
deteriorating?
in this case, since it's a small tank and it's exempt from vapor recovery, in essence, we're not regulating it, other than from the standpoint it needs to be an enclosed tank with a pressure release
I
valve.
could certainly see that this situation, I don't know about this one, but in general, this could cause a lot of pollution to get into the air, contamination get in the air, even though it's not technically operating. And I'd be interested in seeing what we could do to protect people's health. That is a reasonable action.
Councilmember Morgan?
Looking at this gentleman's been here before, talking to us about the pollution, how it's affecting life and so on. Have we measured the air pollution that's going into the air from those tanks?
No, we've not. It's actually quite difficult to measure that. He had a company take a sample there, and
Well, I mean, if you're at his property line and we have our monitors, can we pick up anything?
I'd have to talk to my monitoring people to see if we can pick up. We'd actually have to hire a consultant to do that at the property line.
I could see what his problem would be. If I smell that stuff too and knew it might be harmful, I would be a little upset if it was me. So I want to know if we have had a chance to take a look and see if those pollutants are reaching his property and into his property. If we haven't, then we haven't really, I don't think, done our job in this case. Even a small tank, residuals, how much do they affect life there?
Well, you know what, as I look, what is on our agenda right now is we're looking at this plan, and then we can, whether we want to approve that or not, but it's certainly your request that we get more information on that if you're,
It's not so much the
wanting to
plan.
do that.
I'm looking at just measuring the stuff coming out and
Right,
hitting the
but
line.
that's not before us right now, correct?
That's correct, has to be brought back.
If we want to, but
That's something we can certainly look at. We
And I
can
think-
work with a consultant to accomplish that if need be.
And so I think the only thing that I was seeing in this plan was the potential for exemption, and even that's not part of this. We can do that separately from this plan. So I would just like to direct our attention back to the item before us, if there's any questions on that one.
I think we expressed our concerns.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think they heard. Okay, with that then, we have a recommendation, again, to approve this Arctic.
Second.
We have a motion.
Second.
And a second, and it goes with all the conditions that are along with it.
It's not an
and
approval, it is approval, I'm sorry, I was mixing it up with the budget, so
Okay.
this is an approval.
It is approval
okay.
of the reasonably acceptable control technology state implementation plan. We have a motion and we have a second, and it includes all the findings that go with it and action items as requested. Are there any objections to the motion? And seeing none, then that is approved unanimously. And thank you for your testimony. Our next item then on the agenda, there.
Comprehensive audit.
Thank you. It's item number 10, and this is a receive and file of the comprehensive audit for our fiscal year 2013.
Move to receive and file.
Got a motion and a second. Are there any objections? Not seeing any. And that is then deemed approved unanimously also. Let's go then to item 11. And this is adopting a resolution requesting authorization of the DMV to continue to collect this $2 surcharge.
State law authorizes local air pollution control districts that are non-attainment, such as Ventura County, to collect a $2 surcharge. And these funds can be utilized for 4 specific programs. 1, the Carl Moyer program. 2, the lower emission school bus program. 3, the agricultural assistance program. And 4, a vehicle scrapping program. In 2005, your board authorized the district to collect this fee. To date, your board has distributed nearly $10 million of these monies. Under the Carl Moyer program, $5.2 million has been distributed to replace 159 farm tractors with low-emission tractors. In addition, these match funds, these local match funds, allow us to receive an additional $1.3 million annually from the California Air Resources Board for additional air pollution control projects here in the county. These monies have also been used to allocate $2.2 million under our agricultural assistance program, and that is handled the replacement of 130 agricultural pump engines. We've also allocated $1.8 million to the lower emission school bus program for the replacement and retrofit of school buses, including replacing aging CNG tanks. The district also received nearly $340,000 over this time period to administer these grant programs. When you look at projects funded between 2008 and 2013, these monies have basically achieved 1.5 tons per day in nitrogen oxide emissions. This is 20% of all the NOx emission reductions that were achieved by the district during that time period. So it's quite significant. Further, you're seeing significant reductions of toxic diesel particulate, which is a known carcinogen. You're also seeing reductions of greenhouse gases due to the fact that the new equipment is much more fuel efficient than the replaced equipment. And lastly, local businesses are benefiting from lower maintenance costs and lower fuel costs. The state law that established that original $2 surcharge actually was due to sunset July 1st, 2015. But last year, AB 8, with support from your board, was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor. And this extended the sunset date for the $2 surcharge out till January 1st, 2024. Today, staff is before your board asking that you authorize us to collect this surcharge and continue these very productive programs out to January 1st, 2024. I'd like to remind you of one other thing. When we had our audit last year of the Carl Moyer and the agricultural assistance programs, there was one very notable finding that Ventura County projects were much more cost-effective than the state average under those programs, because we actually rate our programs on cost-effectiveness, where some districts go on a first-come, first-served basis. Also, for every pound we achieve through these incentive programs is a pound we do not have to achieve through our regulatory programs on our already regulated stationary sources. That's all I have. I'll be happy to take questions.
Yeah, Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you for that. I think it's excellent, and I support that. But it's also one of these things I think the public doesn't really know about this too much, or I would encourage the agency and you, Mr. Villegas, to get a press release out, because people don't see air, they breathe it, and tremendous health consequences when it's dirty. And I think people need to get more information. I was at a meeting yesterday with Supervisor Long where it was discussed the number of smokers in our county is declining. I think we're at 12.3%, which has health consequences. This has health consequences, positive, and I'd like to see more information for the public.
Certainly, we can put out, when we do the large group of projects together on an annual basis, I think that would be a great time to put out a press release.
That's perfect.
Councilmember Pollack?
Mike, Councilmember Ramirez and I were at a SCAG meeting on Thursday, and we had a presentation about air quality, and it was really surprising to see how much off-road equipment contributes to the overall NOx and ozone problem. And I'm noticing that these monies are going toward farm equipment and school buses, but is there any similar program that helps with heavy machinery, especially earth-moving equipment?
Yes, there was. And actually, earlier on in the program, we actually went after a lot of construction equipment. And what's happened with the recession, it's not operating as much, so it's not quite as when it's not operating, it's not really cost effective to replace it because it doesn't have existing emissions. But I could see that changing over time. One, we're going to saturate the agricultural community with replacement equipment, and then I think construction equipment will be competing with it on a cost effectiveness basis.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Morgan, you have a comment?
Yeah, and this has been we've been doing this for a long time, and agricultural people really enjoy this program. I've got 2 or 3 I've talked to who says we can't wait, so we don't apply. And these are pretty big-sized farmers, and they've got some equipment that needs to be changed. This has been a successful program since I've been on this board for a long time, and getting rid of all the buses and other things. And you have people that want to do CNG and things like that now. For instance, Roadrunner wants to look at some of the buses and other things they have for CNG. And so we've got a lot of changes going on, and a lot of it's due to this Moyer program, Carl Moyer program, which I'm very supportive of. I'd like to move that we continue our authorization to collect the $2 motor vehicle registration surcharge.
We have a motion and a second. Is that right? Yeah, an incredibly valuable program. It's nice to see how effective it is, and also how we're more effective than other entities out there doing it. And do look forward to some positive press, and we can put that together. And I know you guys certainly have the ability to do that. I was just also thinking, we're looking at the removal of this mostly is the diesel emissions, particulate matter, and all that. But you may have noted, I think last week in the Los Angeles Times, there was an article about UC Riverside students putting together some roof tiles, titanium dioxide tiles that apparently can remove tons of air pollutants from the air. And that might be interesting, following up on that and seeing where that's going. It sounds like a cheap way to actually remove these pollutants that are already out there, though it's really important to keep them from getting out there from the beginning. So good stuff out there. So we have a motion, a second. Seeing no objections on this, then that is also approved. Next item on our agenda is item, waiting for my, here we go. Item number 12, and this is regarding approval of changes, clarifications to the management, confidential, clerical, and other unrepresented employees covered by the APCD's management program.
Good morning,
Good
Chair
morning.
Parks, members of the board. For the record, I'm Yolanda Walker, County Executive Office, Human Resources. The letter before you today requests approval to make changes to the management resolution and to the compensation and benefits of employees represented by this resolution. It was the intent at the time the management resolution was presented in September of 2013 that if some subsequent negotiations included changes, that we would return to your board. This did in fact occur, and as a result, we're recommending a small number of changes to maintain equity for these employees as it pertains to the recently negotiated labor agreements. The first recommended action is to make the following 4 changes to the management resolution. Returns the education incentive to a regular payment included in the employee's take-home pay rather than a 401k account. Grants the August 17th, 2014 market-based adjustment for all classes that are less than 10% above market. Converts the August 16th, 2015 1% market-based adjustment to a 1% general salary increase, and returns the overtime rule so that all paid leave will count towards overtime for non-exempt employees, and that non-FLSA overtime attributable to paid leave be paid at the reduced hourly rate, excluding the salary changes granted under the 50/50 increase effective September 28, 2014. The second recommendation requests approval to adopt the revised management resolution incorporating the modification and updates.
Thank you very much. And that also is a bit of a mouthful, but it comes from a progression of many negotiated meetings. Do we have a motion or questions?
I'll move adoption.
Motion and a second. Are there any objections? Not seeing any objections, and that also is approved unanimously. No, the next item on the agenda is regarding a 4% merit increase for the APCD Air Pollution Control Officer, also affectionately referred to as the airhead. And I know that Mr. Villegas has not had a salary increase for 4 or 5 years. He's actually declined salary increases in the past, and this was a recommendation of the standing committee after reviewing his performance evaluation, which all came out very highly. I don't know if you wanted to make any report on that. But,
It's a 4%, effective June 22nd.
thank you. I'll go ahead and make that motion.
I'll second it.
Are there any objections?
4,
That was 4, not 4-0.
0, 4.
Seeing no objections then that is also approved unanimously. Thank you for that. And then our last item on the agenda, no, it is not our last item on the agenda. Item 14 is, I'll let you explain, but it's to change the time of our meetings here.
Yes, it is. Since November 2001, your board's meetings have begun at 11 a.m. and on Tuesdays. And of course, the Board of Supervisors also meets Tuesdays starting at 8:30 and running to the continuation of their meeting. And there's been situations where we've had conflicts in the start time. To alleviate these concerns, Supervisor Steve Bennett suggested that your board discuss starting our meeting at 1 p.m. instead of 11 a.m. This, of course, would also impact the start time for the standing committee. And I'd like to point out that there would be no adverse impact to APCD staff. Should your board want to move forward with this, we will return to your board in 2 weeks with changes to the operating procedures to make that change in start time. And just to remind you, the 11 a.m. hearing for June 24th on the budget was already noticed, so it would have to take effect in July.
Okay.
But that works out extremely well after talking to the clerk of the board because they already had a 1 p.m. set for July
Okay.
24th.
That's true. We'll have to make sure that we don't have hearings at 1 o'clock now on those days. They're all coordinated, I'm sure. Any questions, comments, motions?
If I just make, I suggested the idea, we just were, to be done by 11 o'clock for the board meeting, it creates a number of dislocations. Sometimes you guys are sitting out there waiting for us to finish a controversial item, et cetera. It just seems cleaner. We'd be much more likely to start promptly right at 1 o'clock, because we would, very likely take a break for closed session. We'd come out of closed session anytime we wanted to. And so I just think it'd be easier for everybody to plan their schedules, but that's why I suggested it. I'm not married to it I'm not passionate, but I think it just
Councilmember
makes
Tucker?
sense.
Sorry. Well, what I was going to say is, well, first of all, thank you for being considerate of the starting time. For me, I would recommend an earlier time instead of a later time. I do have to take a full day off of work in order to come to this meeting, so there's a loss of revenue on my side. If we do it earlier in the morning, then I can get to work a little bit later in the after, as soon as the meeting is over. So I would pose that as a possible consideration.
Just from a board supervisor standpoint, I don't see how that can work for us when we start at 8:30 in terms of doing that. Just a question for you, because I tried to think about, I thought, well, this way somebody could work half day and then only take half day off. Is that, whereas it's in the middle of the day here, but so, I don't know.
I mean, either way, I make it work, but I just, since we're having the discussion, I thought I'd throw it out there as thinking,
I don't see from a board supervisor standpoint how earlier it could work for us. It's 11 o'clock or later, so.
Would 1:30 be better for you than 1 o'clock?
1:30 would probably be better for me.
Works for me.
Works for me.
1:30?
Would you like to, shall we go ahead and then, is there any problem from staff's perspective if we make it 1:30 instead of 1? No.
Does it help a
Okay.
little bit?
Let's see what next month is.
Then
1:30.
go ahead and I'll go ahead and make a motion that we amend the Air Pollution Control Board General Operating Procedures, Policy Number 4, to change the board meeting start times after our next meeting in June, effective July 1, having a start time change from 11 to 1:30.
And I would second that, and thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your comments. Any objections to the motion or abstentions? Okay, then that is also approved unanimously. And now our last item on the agenda is a correspondence agenda. And a nice thank you
1:30.
note on our assistance on with the harbor and getting them electrically energized so they don't have to spew diesel pollutants. And with that, we'll receive and file the correspondence agenda. So moved? Second. Seeing no objections, that passes unanimously, and we'll stand adjourned then. Thank you very much, staff. Good reports.
And good luck with Mr. Webster getting his issue solved with his neighbor.
I'd like to have it tested and see what it does. If they have never tested it,
You can call him Webster.
if they've never measured it, and answered it properly, like we monitor all around county.
No, it's the committee.
Could you keep it on real quick? Could you let us know how long do you think standing committee is going to last so the board members can kind of plan showing up for the closed session? All right, so board members